Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander video. In today's episode, we're going to be going over my top 10 cards for Commander from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. There is an absolute bucket load of really awesome cards from this set, because it's not just the set that we're going to be looking at, we also have the Commander products and the Jurassic World cards as well. And that's actually where we're going to be starting with our first honorable mention for the day. Our first honorable mention is Hunting Velociraptor. It is 2 and a red for a 3/2 creature dinosaur with First Strike. It also has dinosaur spells you cast have Prowl for 2 and a red. That means you may cast a spell for its Prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a creature of any of its creature types. Basically, with this in play, if you've dealt combat damage with a dinosaur, all of your dinosaurs for the rest of the turn only cost a 2 and a red to play. This card is actually unbelievably obscene, and the only reason it's an honorable mention is because it's just in the Jurassic World collection, means that it's kind of really expensive at time of recording. Hopefully at some point soon it'll get an in-world Magic reprint, which means the price will come down and the rest of us can kind of get our hands on it. Because there's definitely a chance this is a staple in all dinosaur decks going forward. Our second honorable mention is Wave Goodbye. It is 2 blue for a sorcery to return each creature without a +1/+1 counter on it to its owner's hand. The reason this is only an honorable mention is because it is a little niche. It only goes in specifically like in the blue-green +1/+1 counters decks. In those decks, this is basically a one-sided board wipe. That's really strong, because this only goes into those decks and you need to be in 2 colours. Like the +1 counters deck isn't really in blue. It's normally based in white and green with maybe splashing blue as your second or third colour. So just because of those reasons, it's a little bit niche. It's just an honourable mention, but still a very strong card. The last honourable mention may actually be my favourite Commander card from the set, but I'm going to be using it a little bit weirdly, so that's why it's just an honourable mention. The card I want to talk about is Skeleton Crew. It is 3 and a black for a 3/3 creature skeleton pirate. It has each other creature you control that's a skeleton or a pirate gets +1/+1. It also has, whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black skeleton pirate creature token, and 5 and a black, return Skeleton Crew from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if played fairly, this is just a perfectly fine Lord for a skeleton or a pirate deck. But that's not why I want to play it. I want to play it because I like playing Dredge in every format possible. When you dredge something back to your hand, it is leaving your graveyard, so with this you will make that 2/2 skeleton body. The fact it also has a way to bring itself back from the graveyard into play means that if you have dredged or milled it away, you can get it back. To me, that is everything I want to be doing in a game of Commander, so I definitely had to mention it a little bit, even though that might be a little bit niche for everyone else. But don't sleep on this card. If you're doing graveyard stuff, I think it's really cool. Alright, it's time to move on to the list proper. At number 10, we have Get Lost. It is 1 and a white for an instant that says destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens. Okay, so let's get this out of the way first. This is an extremely good Magic card. It answers 3 very real things. You want to be killing planeswalkers, you want to be killing creatures, and you also want to have answers for enchantments. The downside as well is not that bad. 2 map tokens is really not the end of the world for your opponent to have. Especially in Commander as well, they also need to have a creature in play to actually use it, and in theory you're killing their best creature with this spell. So that we really like. It's also very efficient. 1 and a white to just remove something, you're going to be up on mana with that. You're going to be taking out something bigger, generally speaking. So I will fully admit, there is definitely an argument this should just be way higher on my list. So why is it not? Well, I'll be honest, it's just a little bit boring. It is kind of hard to get excited by like the 3rd or 4th best removal spell in any given colour. Especially in this set where there's a ton of cool build around cards for us to look at. But don't get me wrong, this card will see a lot of play, and quite rightly so. It just doesn't have that certain I don't know what, you know what I mean? But let's move on to number 9 now with Illustrious Wonderglyph. It is 4 and a white for a 2/2 artifact creature golem. It has Ascend, which means if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the city's blessing for the rest of the game. It also has other artifacts you control get +2/+2 as long as you have the city's blessing, and importantly, at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 colourless gnome artifact creature token. So, I love Tendershoot Dryad from the original Ixalan, and this card is kind of better. Getting Ascending Commander is really easy. If you've just curved out, or if you've ramped this out, you're probably going to have Ascended by the time it comes round the board. That's because, importantly, it makes us a golem on every upkeep, not just ours, our opponents as well. That is really good at just making you a board state. And then when you have those 10 permanents, the buff that this gives to specifically all of our artifacts, not just the golems, to all of our artifact creatures is just going to be really good. +2/+2 is a lot of power and toughness when you're going wide with little creatures. So this is not only a token maker, it's also an anthem as well, all stapled onto one card. That is going to be very, very strong. This should really not be slept on. If you're in any kind of deck where you're planning on turning artifact creatures sideways, you probably should be running this card. But moving on, at number 8 we have Bloodletter of Aklazot. It is 1 black, black, black for a 2/4 creature vampire demon with flying. It also has, if an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. So this card beat the hell out of me at pre-release. That wasn't super fun, but this card is just really strong, it's really cool. We've seen some effects like this before where kind of double up the amount of life people lose in a turn, but that's not what I would compare these to. For me, this is like the black version of a red damage doubler. That's probably actually why it's triple black in the casting cost, so you can't run too many of those together. But those damage doubler effects are just really, really good and really, really strong in Commander, and I don't think this will be an exception. Any deck that can reasonably cast this, so I'm thinking specifically like mono black or like a heavy black 2-color deck, should probably just run this card, because it kind of doubles everything that those decks want. Like, it counts combat damage, it counts life drain, and so unless you're planning on winning by milling people out, everything I've just mentioned is how those decks are going to be trying to win. Doubling that up is going to be awesome. I do actually specifically want to shout out Aristocrat decks with this card, where you have lots of little points of ping and drain life. The doubling up of every Zulaport Cutthroat trigger will be really scary with this card out, and that's probably the best place for it, but if I own one of these, I'd probably run it in any black heavy deck I could. Next up is OGJ Ptic, Deepest Epoch. It is 2 blue blue for a 4/3 legendary creature god with flying, and whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains rebound. That means that you exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of the next upkeep, you may cast that spell from exile without paying its mana cost. It also has, when it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control with 3 time counters on it. When you do that, it transforms into the Temple of Cyclical Time, which is a land that has tap, add a blue, and remove a time counter from it. When it has no time counters left on it, you can pay 2 and a blue and tap it to transform it back into the god. So I actually really like this card. Giving all your instants rebound is actually very strong. It's way better than it sounds. I had a Tygam OGJ Master deck for quite a long time, and that deck was really good. Like, Tygam can also do sorceries, which is a good thing in one respect, but it also had to attack for you to get that ability, meaning you had to go through some extra hoops in order to make it work. The fact that this can just sit in play and do it is really good. Either as a commander or just in any kind of spellslinger deck, it's going to be really solid at doubling up all your spells. Importantly as well, because when you cast spells from rebound, you are casting them, you're not copying them, it'll trigger everything that you want it to trigger. So it'll trigger like your Pyromancer style cards, it'll count towards your Storm count, we all love that. Yes, you won't be rebounding things like your counter magic, stuff like that, but like, casting Dig Through Time twice is really good. Casting 2 Magma Opuses, for example, also, that just sounds great to me. And the fact that once it's removed, it can just come back again is gonna be pretty solid. If it's your commander, it's a way of getting around the commander tax. If it's not your commander, it's a way of just keeping it in play if it gets removed. I like this card, I think it's gonna be a ton of fun. At number 6, we have Echoing Deeps. It is a land cave that can tap for a generic mana. Or, when it enters play, it can enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land in a graveyard, except it's a cave in addition to its other types. So there are just so many good lands that people run in Commander. At a base level, this is just the best land that happens to have been milled or put into the graveyard naturally. If this comes in as a copy of a command tower, then you're pretty happy. There's also lands that put themselves into the graveyards. I'm thinking like yes, I know tapped fetch lands aren't fantastic, but just having that utility to get another fetch land to fix yourself on your next turn is going to be pretty solid. Then you have the slightly more broken option of this coming in as the second copy of an Urza Saga that's already put itself into the graveyard. 2 Urza Sagas is normally going to be pretty good. I'm not sure how unpopular this next take is going to be, but we're kind of at a point in Commander where people should be running more land destruction. I don't mean like Armageddon or things like that, but as decks are getting better, you should have more answers to things that your opponents are doing. And again, I don't mean like strip mining, logging people out of the game. I mean like Demolition Field, something fair like that should just probably be in most 2-color decks. And as people realize that, if you're in a deck running more important, powerful utility lands, then something like Echoing Deeps just gets better. It can be your second copy of like Field of the Dead or your Cabal Coffers if that ever gets destroyed. If you're running those powerful utility lands as an important part of what your deck is trying to do, then you probably should be running Echoing Deeps as well now. Worst case, it's a land that doesn't come into play tapped and taps for a generic. But the flip side, it could just be a second copy of the best land in your deck, and that's really good. We like that. Alright, moving on to number 5 now, we have OGJ Attack Deepest Foundation. It is 4 white for a legendary creature god. It's a 6/6 with Vigilance. It has, if one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, 3 times that many of those tokens are created instead. And then it has the god ability of this set. When it dies, it comes back transformed and tapped under its owner's control. It comes back as the Temple of Civilization, which taps for a white, and also has pay 2 and a white and tap it, transform the temple, activate only if you've attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn, and only as a sorcery. So we know in Commander that token doublers are good. From your doubling season to your anointed processions, they just see play. In the decks that want them, these are some of the best cards. They can take a decent board state and turn it into a scary one very, very quickly. So the fact this is a token tripler that is in white is going to be really good. It is 6 mana, and on a creature, which I will admit are drawbacks, but the fact it can come back later in the game if it's ever been removed is going to be nice. It's not indestructible, but that's still good. It's not nothing. The 6 mana casting cost part of this package is why this isn't higher on my list. Normally you want to get these token doubler effects down before you play your tokens, so you get the benefit out of them straight away. This is not great as the last card in your hand if you have no ways of making tokens. But if you're putting this in your deck, you can have token makers that make tokens when they're already in play, so you get the bonus straight away with this. Like for example, having a Scoot Swarm in play, you play this, you play a land. Boof, that's kind of unbelievably gross. And then like the rest of the token doublers, it's also worth mentioning that it doesn't just have to be creature tokens, it can be treasure or other kind of artifact tokens, so if you're doing anything with that, keep that in mind as well. Moving on to number 4, next we have the Millennium Calendar. It is a single generic mana for a legendary artifact. It has, whenever you untap 1 or more permanents during your untap step, put that many time counters on the Millennium Calendar. It also has pay 2 generic and tap it to double the number of time counters on the Millennium Calendar. And then the important part why we're all here, when there are 1,000 or more time counters on the Millennium Calendar, sacrifice it and each opponent loses 1,000 life. This is on the list because I really like alternate win conditions, and this is a very cool and very unique one. Now, I will be honest, it is a little bit slow. It basically takes between 7 to 10 turns of tapping it every turn, depending on how many permanents you have in play, to make it work and to win with the 1,000 life thing. That's not fast. Okay, that's not fast. You could run it with a card like Sphinx of the Second Sun that gives you an additional beginning phase, which includes an additional untap step, which is quite nice. You'd also run it as a win condition in like a deck taking infinite turns. That I do actually really like. That sounds really stupid. I guess it's also sort of a backup win condition if you've made infinite tokens and you can't attack a player, you can attack a different player, then they're all on tap on your next. Okay, that's a lot of hoops, I'll admit. Maybe that's not great, but I think this card is really cool. I'm probably going to give it a go. And there's definitely more powerful cards on this list. There's definitely more powerful cards below it on this list, but it's cool, and you will remember when you do this more than some of the other cards, I think. But let's move on to number 3 now. Next we have Matzalanti, the Great Door. It is 3 generic for a legendary artifact. You can tap it to draw a card and discard a card, and you can also pay 4 generic and tap it to transform it, which you can only do if there are 4 or more permanent type cards in your graveyard. So as a reminder, that's artifact, battles, creatures, enchantments, lands, and planeswalkers. When you do this, it transforms into the Core. It is a legendary land that has Fathomless Descent, which is tap, add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So I'll be honest, this is probably way higher on my list than most people's. If I couldn't have Skeleton Crew on my list, I'm definitely going to have at least one graveyard self-mill card here. I absolutely love doing graveyard stuff, and in a lot of the decks I play, that is not going to be hard to activate. If you're including this in your deck, you do need to know that it's in your deck and basically build accordingly to it. Effectively think of it as like you want to be like turning on Delirium or stuff like that. Those are some hoops to go through, but I think it's worth it because if you can flip this, this could easily be tapping for like 20 or 30 mana. That is a lot of mana, and for me, as this is how I play a lot of my Commander games, having access to that large amount of mana seems awesome, and this is one I'm really looking forward to sleeving up and killing some opponents with. Okay, we're getting up there now. At number 2, we have Golter Stampede Tyrant. It is 5 green for a 12/12 legendary creature Elder Dinosaur with Trample. Good, I'm glad it has Trample. When it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So, go with me on this. What do a lot of green decks in Commander tend to have in common? The fact they're ramping. In Commander, this is a great thing to ramp into, because it then also brings everything else that you have in your hand straight into play with it. It brings the friends. Shockingly, putting a large amount of beef onto the battlefield is normally going to be pretty good. But what's actually busted about this card is that it's not a cast trigger, it's an enter the battlefield effect. That means if you cheat this into play, you will still get that ability. If you reanimate it, if you tap an Elvish Piper to just put it into play, anything like that, you then get to dump the rest of your hand straight into play. The fact that green also has a bunch of creature tutors that put cards into your hand is going to be really good. It can help set up Coulter so you have that super impactful turn. Like honestly, Coulter could just be the new big green win condition in all of Commander. So that brings us on to number 1. At number 1, we have Roaming Throne. It is 4 generic mana for a 4/4 artifact creature golem with Ward 2. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It is the chosen type in addition to its other types. And then this is the good line of text. If a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, it triggers an additional time. Of every card we've seen, this just goes into so many decks, it's just going to be extremely powerful. At a base level, if your commander has a good triggered ability, you just run this card. Just look at the most popular commanders on EDHREC from the past 2 years. It'll double up Atrax's Proliferate ability. It'll double up the attack trigger on the Dragon. It doubles up the combat damage ability of Lathril. It doubles up the life loss when dealing damage of Yuriko. You make 2 zombies with Wilhelt and you double the amount of tokens made with Miriam. A lot of the time, if your commander has a good ability, that's probably one of the reasons why you built that deck in the first place. Just in those decks, it's another copy of Stronic Resonator that once it's in play, you don't have to pay to activate. But just stop a sec and think about the last 2 that I mentioned. Think about Wilhelt or Miriam decks. Typal decks with a bunch of the same type of creatures jammed into them. The Roaming Throne doubles up all triggered abilities of the type of creature that you have chosen. So that is when this card gets super scary. Just imagine it in a Wilhelt deck for a sec. When you have this in play, not only does it double up both Wilhelt triggers, but it doubles up like the life drain on a Diagraph Captain, the zombie making of a Diagraph Colossus. It draws you 2 cards of an Undead Augur. And then possibly the spiciest one, it'll double up the ETB effect of a Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Think about how good that actually is, and then think how good that can be in like a Miriam Dragon deck, with all the triggered abilities on all those dumb dragons out there. Or think of it in an Edgar Markov Vampire deck. If you're in a Creature Type Matters deck, and you have a commander with a triggered ability, you should just run this card now. It is going to be unbelievably immense. Alright, that is our list. Do let me know what your favourite cards are for Commander down in the comments. Always good to see them. And do make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you get notified when we do more of these Commander videos. But anyway, until next time, I will see you all soon. Goodbye.